Welcome to Essays and IPAs, presented by CDI Studios.
So thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of Essays and IPAs. Today I have a little bit of a switch up. I don't have at least one person that you guys have met before. I have two new people. So once again, I'm Michael Colonno, the AVP of the Data Center Solution team here at CDI. Jason?
I'm Jason McKenry. I'm one of the directors in the Solutions Architects team, but I'm also the CTO of the Digital Workspace.
Dual wielding.
Absolutely.
Dual wielding titles.
Yeah,
Very
right.
nice.
I need another beer.
I mean, we could do that.
I'm Jarett, Kulm, Solution Architect, covering all data center technologies and high-performance compute.
Yep. So you guys have watched some of the episodes. We've had a few now at this point, so you know kind of some of the questions that are coming. First one is always kind of like, what got you started? Was there a breaking point? Like, is there something that happened in your career as a TC or whatever it might be, or I should say technical consultant, engineer? Obviously, that's, one of the worst things about technology is acronyms, right? We're so bad with acronyms. We literally say acronyms. We don't say, some people don't say subject matter expert or SME. They say SME. What the F is a SME? It sounds like something that like you'd hear, like Gollum say or something. I don't know. But anyway, so what's your story?
So I was an implementation engineer with the company that CDI acquired, Plan B Technologies.
Sure.
And I was actually in a kickoff meeting for a project that was going to start the next day. And I thought it was in Chantilly, Virginia, which, if you know anything about the Maryland, D.C. area, from Annapolis, where our office was, is basically the other side of the planet. And so I was already in a grumpy mood about that because it's one of those places that could take 40 minutes or 6 hours to drive to. So we get on the kickoff call, and this is about 15 hours before the project is going to start at this point. 2-week project, and I find out that no, in fact, it's in this little podunk nothing town in the middle of West Virginia.
Very nice.
So I've got to go home, tell my wife that, by the way, I'm going to be gone for the next 2 weeks, starting tomorrow, and drive out there. And so, I spent 2 weeks out in this little town.
Bring home some moonshine?
I could have. And I mean, the project went fine, but it was one of those, up in the middle of the night, working through everything, sitting on the data center floor.
Yeah.
And then during the day, it was the middle of nowhere, so I had nothing to do. And I got like a week and a half into that project, and I'm just like, I'm over this. And, we were a smaller company. We had a lot of kind of, you do a lot of post-sales, but a little bit of pre-sales.
Sure,
and I
the hybrid.
Said, yeah, and I said,
it.
you know what, I want to focus on the pre-sale side, and so moved in that direction and kind of
haven't looked back.
Absolutely.
Okay, not bad. No. Well, so I have to also pause, because I also say that everybody, just like everybody has a story for that, everybody has a story of the booze. So is there a booze or something like that that you're just like, I can't smell it, I can't look at it?
See, I feel like this is like half the people ask the question, is the answer, it's tequila.
Tequila?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had that night, and now it's one of those where, like, if I ease into it, maybe, but, like, if I take a shot, it hits my stomach, I've got that decision moment of, like,
Okay. So for you, Jarett, we'll start with the booze question, and then we'll actually go to, because that's way more important than technical stuff.
I would say spiced rum.
Spiced rum.
I've had, in my youth, too many bad Captain Morgan experiences.
Okay,
So that's something.
Well, hold on.
So much better things out there.
Well, you said youth. So what do you mean by youth?
Still adults.
Yeah, okay. I'm just making sure.
Still
why 21, of course.
Listen, there's no judgment at this little round table here. It's just, it's all friends. It's all friends.
Back when it was a choice between like Mad Dog or Captain Morgan, there is no right choice.
I would have gone towards what you chose, honestly. Yeah. Mad Dog was never a good choice. Okay, so getting into more of an architectural role, what was that trigger point for you?
So throughout my entire career, like even starting, I was doing development as a business when I was in high school.
Yeah.
So I've been in the industry a very long time, and it was all customer facing. Back then, people did not know about databases or design. They didn't really know about programming for that. So it was always architecture the entire way.
Okay.
So I did that for quite a few years. I was a one-man army at a company who happened to be a customer of where we are now.
Okay.
So throughout that, just interfacing with the company High Availability at the time, acquisition that CDI made, I did my own designs and architectures, and I gave it to the rep just to fulfill. So once I moved over to HA, now CDI, I would do implementations, but we were also both pre-sales and post-sales. So I figured after a certain amount of time, I just wanted to focus on the architecture and pre-sale side.
So hold on. You draw up a whole design and hand that to the rep and say
to the part numbers.
What?
Yes.
Wow, man, lucky rep right there.
Yeah,
Holy cow.
geez. I know.
Yeah.
I mean, we wouldn't have a job, but
I know.
But
I know. That's pretty nice.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
So how long were you at your previous company before we acquired you?
I guess about 8 years or so. I just passed my 10-year total.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's been a haul. And I always told people it was a funny company, and I think CDI was a lot of the same way. Where, particularly with engineers, we had a lot of people who had been there for a really long time, and then we had a lot of people that were just kind of like starting out. But it was one of those where if you made it past about the 6-month point, you were in it for a decade. There was very little turnover after that point, but there was a lot of holy cow, this is rapid pace, high pressure. I can't, I can't hang with this. And a lot of people pulled the ripcord in that first 6 months.
Yeah. So I'll say real quick, for those that don't know, the company that Jason came from, what was funny is they actually were our VDI arm for many years. So our VDI practice basically got poached, I will say, whether it be by customer, for good reason, for customers and VMware and all these different reasons. And for many years after that, they were just so good at whether it was VMware's Horizon or whether it was Citrix that it was a great solution, for us as CDI to continue our practice that way. And also, you guys already kind of figured out that magic formula of how to make those projects profitable. I will say that for those for those customers that are watching that did it previously, congratulations, you got a great deal on those projects, most likely. But yeah, so I was lucky. At CDI, the joke I always make is our first acquisitions were our friends, and so true. That's how I always felt, because I already knew a lot of you guys before we actually got involved business wise.
Well, it was two-way, because we used you guys for EMC and a whole bunch of other stuff, and it was one of those where we already know a third of the people over there. This isn't it was a really weird acquisition, because I've been through a bunch in the financial sector where it was a knife fight, and this was super friendly, and it was a different experience for sure.
Sure. So Jarett, how long were you at the previous company?
I believe about 10 and a half years.
Okay.
Quite a while. And then a customer for 7 years before that. So really been in the family almost 2 decades now.
It's crazy how many 10-year answers you get to that question.
It's crazy. I mean, I'm going on 7 years here at CDI, and I will say that I'm kind of legacy CDI, right?
OG.
Yeah, OG CDI. In previous episodes, you saw Rob, who's been here for a decent amount of time. You saw Kyle, who was even longer, but he, we always joke he's had every position here at CDI. It's very interesting. Now, the other joke I always make about HA is that there was 1,000 CCIEs at HA. I always used to joke that even the janitor was a CCIE. So previous on one of the previous episodes, we talked about certifications, right? And it's interesting to me, certifications, the importance of them through your careers, right? You have, whether you work at a vendor, a customer, or whether you're starting out, there's different importance levels. So I'll kind of pose the question to you guys first, and I'll answer as well. Actually, I'm going to ask Jarett first. I've been going to you first. So I'm curious, because Jarett and I have talked about these before on our one-on-one. So what importance would you say starting out in your career did or does certifications play? And at this point in your career, how do you kind of view certifications?
So, due to the span, even when I started, there was a lot of push towards degrees in technology. And luckily that's fallen by the wayside because it doesn't matter what you learn in university, you're going to learn more in your first month on the job.
Yes.
So as that has worn off, then certifications have definitely picked up some of the slack. So they are definitely good paths towards learning. Many companies are a good foot in the door, but you should not make that your only source of information and study.
Sure. Now, I have to say, like you also said at one point, you had the alphabet.
Yes.
So
I had at my being at a VAR, you have to certify and get accreditations for every product that you work with or deploy.
Sure.
So HA, for a while I was there, was a smaller company. There were 3 of us having to get every single certification.
I know that life.
At my peak, I had 70.
You might get like a week notice. You got to take this.
70 active or
70 active.
So I'd like everybody to let that set in for a moment. Let it marinate. 70 active certifications.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to take a pause just because you said VAR. So you said an acronym. So like for reseller buzzword bingo. That's value-added reseller, for those that are at a customer or wherever, you might not know what that is. And also, let's kind of just say also, when you are at a reseller, this is one of the values that we have to customers that may be watching or whomever, right, or vendors. We have to, our partnerships are multiple different levels. It's different revenue of the products we sell. It's different specializations in certain areas, certain product lines, and there's everything from a video you have to watch on what a PowerPoint deck should look like to deep technical tests that we have to take at test centers and like the certifications we're talking about. In some of these certifications, you may or may not know, like I mentioned, CCIE is a multi-level test. You have to have a CCNA to a CCNP to a CCIE. And there's multiple parts to some of these tests, right? I just want to kind of set that stage for, if there's people getting into the industry, some have more value than others, right?
I think that's the key.
The thing that I was always taught coming in was like, well, CCIE is fantastic because your starting salary is like $150,000 wherever you go, right? Like kind of thing. Like you just walk in and they just throw money at you, right? But I just want to kind of set that stage for that. But so Jason, like what value do you think you really have, like starting in an industry as well as kind of like where you are in this, kind of like, I won't say you're at the pinnacle, but you're very mature in the industry, right?
See, there's that calling us old thing again.
No, no, I didn't say legacy. I said pinnacle. I said
fair
mature.
Enough. No, I think your point about different sorts have different values, like super important.
Yeah.
Years ago there was always the term like paper MCSE with like Microsoft certs, where like you would get these people who like got the cert but didn't actually have the skills to stand behind it. CCIE is a great example, one where like you really can't get that cert without having
practical. There's a practical portion.
Tough.
Same
cert.
thing with BCDX.
Yep.
Same thing with I'm trying to think of the other VMware. VCAP. VCAP, the whole thing is a practical click around, right? So
I guess as a general stance, like early in your career, it can be a differentiator for, setting yourself apart from maybe other junior resources, and it can be something that kind of elevates you. At this point, like, when I interview people, it's less of an emphasis on that. It's a good indicator maybe of where they focused and what they've been interested in.
Sure. Dedication to something.
Right. But what does kind of muddle that a bit is a lot of companies have that HR filter of they're looking for the letters, and you got to balance.
Well, I mean, and once again, it's an interesting thing. I'm very proud that CDI has stopped with the BA thing, right? The audience has probably watched some of the CTO podcasts. An unknown kind of fact is that our CTO for a long time, didn't have a degree. And I was actually very proud of that because I have a lot of friends that are very high up in their careers and didn't bother. Like one of my best friend, he was going to college and he was doing programming and things like that, and he started to ask questions to the professor and he didn't know the answers. So when you surpass your professor, it's probably not worth that 46 grand or whatever you're paying a year, right? Like there's a problem there. But it's also, I mean, that's also why I think if you have a specific area, you look for those colleges or academies or technical schools that have like adjuncts because they work in the field, right? Or something like that.
Yep.
So now, are there certain certifications that you go after still, or is it just because you want to stay up in a particular technology?
I mean, I've got a handful that I maintain for partnerships that are like higher level certs with
like Citrix,
and VMware and things like that. But I mean, I kind of have the luxury with CDI of like the team's big enough that I can go after the ones that I'm interested in. And so, like I heard you mention earlier, talking about you go to a conference and like maybe I'll take a shot at like this cert or that cert, and it's more opportunistic than like I have to get this. So
I'll give you a perfect example. Nutanix is famous for giving like free exams for certain times. I took 2 exams because they were free, and I passed one of them cold. I didn't study for them. I just happened to know the technology that well, right? Which is great. I've done the same thing for VMware and just been like, well, I know. This is my like every day. I probably could pass this, but it's tough. Like so that leads us into the next form of this, which is the actual tests. So tests and test centers, test taking. So I think we all have either a funny story of a test center or just a test that is literally written for you to fail. Like I know, like because you mentioned like Microsoft ones, I always hated Microsoft. I think
progressives.
I want to say my Exchange 2013. I want to say I took 6 times. Because I feel like the person, like they're not written by technical people, they're written by test writers.
Well, the Microsoft tests were famous too. I mean, this has become more and more common, but their testing's designed so that like if you get questions wrong early on, they'll narrow in on those areas of weakness and grill you. And it's brutal. But no, my worst was it was actually Nutanix. I failed an exam before I even started. It was start of COVID, remote proctor.
Oh, it was the remote.
I couldn't meet the requirements for the proctor. I had stuff on my desk, there was nowhere in my house.
You essentially have to be naked in a table that you can see everything underneath.
Yep. So no, I had to pull the ripcord on the test before I even got started on it because like I simply could not meet the requirements of the test. Yeah, so that was my worst. Is I didn't even get to take the test.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I got before I kick it over to Jarett here. Like I had the same similar thing happen with a similar test where I happen to have a learning disability. That's something that not everybody knows, but I actually have a learning disability. And for me to absorb information a lot of times, I have to mouth the words or read it out loud. So I started mouthing the words, and the proctor pings me in the chat like, you have to stop reading the words. And I'm thinking, like, if I have such a complex lip-reading system, you should just give me credit at that point.
I mean, that's fair.
Because, like, I apparently architected this amazing, like, mouth mapping system that translates into words. What do you think's going to happen here? You think that this test is that prestigious that, like, it's worth, like, investing in this? But anyway, so Jarett.
I've definitely had a lot of bad exams where the questions were flat out incorrect.
Yes.
And it's to the point where if it's an online, like a partner or just something that's not the top level where you can do it online, I've written multi-page documents about either why the questions are flat out wrong because it's the wrong choice, or whoever picked this, their own experiences were not up to date enough to actually be for that software version that it was tested on. And it's definitely very frustrating because depending on the test center or the day of the week, you might be on a different version of the test than someone else was.
Yeah.
And I don't want to call out any names, but I know I will, like NetApp exams.
Okay.
There was a long period, especially when they were doing their 7-mode to cluster mode.
Yes.
And is your exam today going to be 8.2, 8.3, 9.0, 9.1, or what? Because that changes the answers entirely.
Completely, yeah.
But they wouldn't illustrate within the exam what version of code you're actually looking at to know how to answer that question. So it's things like that, or the use of not and trick words.
Yes.
Multiple choice.
Yep.
Choose all
that apply, right? And you're like, well, isn't this the same? Isn't A and D the same?
Yeah. I definitely have a rant or a diatribe on my blog about like why certs are BS. And I'm not saying that against the certs. I'm saying it against certain tests or mechanisms. Like having a forced class and a $3,000 or $4,000 tax just before you can sit the exam.
Well, the other fun of this is being a partner to these vendors. Every now and then we got the opportunity to take a beta exam. Which
I've done those before.
And most exams are like there may be like a 200 question set and you're answering 50 of them or something like that. Well, the beta exams, not only are they like an early version of the questions, but it's usually also the entire set.
Yes.
And so like you get that, whoa. We'll let you take the exam for free, but it's a beta. No.
I've done I've done VMware VCAPs of betas before.
Yeah, it's tough.
And it's tough. It's tough for sure. So I have to say that to kind of pause there for a second. Certifications are important. Especially if you're starting in the industry. If you're looking to career shift, if you're looking to subject matter shift, it gives you some credibility, right? Yes. Once you build your resume, once you have some clout in whatever that is, whether it's SAN or whether it's networking or EUC, whatever it may be, end user computing, parentheses. Then you're okay. Then you can let those fall off. But it's a guaranteed, recognized stamp of approval for whatever that technology is, right? Yeah. It's tough otherwise because then you have to Jason's point in terms of filters on like a LinkedIn search or whatever it may be, you have to be able to be referenced at that point. Not just have references, but re-reference to a position. Because otherwise that HR person, or whomever, recruiter, searching for criteria. I worked for an IT recruiter. We had web crawlers that just searched that stuff. So it's not even someone talking. It basically combed like Monster and Career Builder and Indeed and Dice and all those things and gave them a list of people to talk to that already qualified. Well, if you don't have those things, so be it.
I would definitely say they're a good investment in your career overall. For $200 or $300, the benefit, and you have to think of them also as what they're testing you for. You're learning about the future vision of that company. So if it's a product that you use, their certs are entirely advertising for them. I remember early on with the VMware certs, it was entirely features and functionality of Enterprise Plus because they wanted you to use that.
Yes.
So by learning that, you get ready for not just the current product, but what's their future vision.
Well, and I think for you, the value a little bit is in how you prepare for it. If you just sit down and go through the exam prep guide or and do it all on paper, you might get the sheet, you might get the passing grade, whatever. But if you actually sit down and install vSphere and go through the features and actually get hands-on and learn the stuff, it's a good way to kind of guide that learning experience, get some value out of it, and then get the letters at the end of it that say know what you're doing.
And it's a lot easier now than it was 20 years ago or 25 years ago. The amount of information freely available is just absolutely insane.
Oh, YouTube videos for literally anything?
Blog posts about every single thing possible. I know early on in my career I worked at Oracle, and I was trying to get Oracle certs before then, where there really weren't classes outside of Oracle education for $5,000.
Yeah.
This was back in like 98 or 99. First day at Oracle, my cubicle was filled with books. And when I say filled, taller than me, stacks of it. Every single Oracle press book ever made in my cubicle.
Oh my goodness!
And
is that like the welcome package?
Yeah, pretty much. Because it's not like they had good search for their documentation. They're a database company, so it's like even with all of that, it was still hard to get those certs. On, but now it's definitely a lot easier. So you can find anything you need. You can find study guides. Like I've done multiple study guides for different technologies. Other people have as well.
Well, and the other, I mean, this is kind of one of the cool things about like the rise of public cloud is so many of these vendors now have free hands-on labs that you can go sign up for a free account and spin up. It might be short-lived. It might only be in environments up for 2-3 days at a time, but you can actually for free get your hands on this stuff and actually kick it around without having to hunt down partner licenses and stuff like that. So I mean, it is a lot more approachable than it ever used to be.
So I obviously have to pause for a second and bring it to this nice beer. So this is Forgotten Boardwalk Brewing Company. I've had this before. It's called Funnel Cake. It's my wife and I found this actually at a festival, and I'm a big fan. What do you guys think?
It is awesome. This is it's nice and smooth.
Cheers first, by the way. Cheers.
Funnel Cake's a good name for it, though.
Yeah. So I mean, just because in our last one we kind of rated things. What are you thinking? Now this is not an IPA, so it is not true to the name, but it's still an ale.
If it was an IPA, I would not be drinking it. So
oh, really? Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know.
I'll give it like a 4 out of 5 for being an ale. There's a lot of extra stuff going on there. It's good, but the purists are gonna have an issue.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm rating it in terms of just an ale, I think it's just tasty. But if I'm looking at it in terms of like a beer versus something like we had in the previous episodes, I'd probably go with like a 3.7. Yeah. But like I do just find it tasty.
Yeah, I'd say 4 out of 5.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Yeah. Very nice. So one of the other things that I want to talk about with both of you. So I guess I should pause for a second and say, the two gentlemen to the sides of me are very technical people. I would say that Jarett is one of our most technical people on the team.
Absolutely.
So I want to ask. We kind of already alluded to that you do end user computing and virtual desktops and things like that. But is there anything that you want to say? And so, like, is that like why did you gravitate towards that?
Opportunity, really.
Okay.
So, I mean, my background is general infrastructure. So, I mean, I've been doing servers and storage and network and basically the data center for years now. But every kind of step through my career, there was always a need for kind of that end user space. COVID, you can say a lot of things about it. We have a lot of, kind of what happened through that in our go-to-market messaging and all of that.
Yeah.
But it really created a need like never before in that space, and so I enjoy it, but it really is just demand, opportunity more than anything.
Okay. Now, Jarett, you already said when your introduction, high performance computing, so that kind of what was a foreshadowing for what was to come, right? So I guess. Why did you gravitate towards that? What do you think is most interesting? And I'll add another area, which we might go back to you, Jason. Is like, what do you think is kind of like what's coming?
So, everywhere I've worked, I've tried to point myself in a certain direction based off of where I want to go or what the future might hold. So, yes, there's a lot of people that do data center, a lot that do SAN or virtualization, and throughout my career, I've had to do all of that, or networking, for example. But high-performance computing and AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, have to
avoid that acronym.
Use all of that. That's a field that every single person uses it today, whether you know or not.
Yeah.
Every business, especially enterprise, if they have not already adopted it today, they're going to in the future, one way or another. Doesn't matter if you're just replying to an email with the autocomplete, that's machine learning, or the vacuum on the floors. So because there's so few people really looking into that from the infrastructure and design and architecture, it was a good place to fill in. But also I think it's very interesting.
I agree, yeah.
It's something that very few people are doing from the architecture side.
Yep.
And unfortunately what I see is the people that are actually working in this field as data scientists or researchers, they have no idea what's going on under their specific code.
Sure.
And that's the same problem we face with developers or DevOps or any of that.
Yeah.
And not against those people. It's not their job to be experts on the OS, the servers, the storage.
Yeah. They just have requirements.
Yeah. So I figure let me take all those other pieces under the covers. And power. Power is always an issue with all of those deployments. So it's really just letting me jump into that field, but also as we see new technologies like PCIe 5 coming out with CXL, that just is a way to share memory or other devices across multiple nodes and systems, simplifying it down greatly.
Yeah.
But that's going to be
It's huge.
Yeah,
That's huge.
Absolutely huge in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I would take an H100 right now, but so, something that we've seen kind of a rise in that space is composable architecture. Do you really think there's a need for that, or do you think it's one of those things that was developed a little early?
I'd say it definitely filled a need, and what composable architecture is just like you have network switches to link together servers. Composable basically gets a PCIe switch, and it has a box of just a bunch of cards like GPUs, network adapters, storage, and all your servers are on that PCIe switch. So on demand, you can create templates and compose your servers how you want them.
Yeah.
Absolutely great in university environments where a class during 1 hour might need different hardware than another, or big enterprise, or production like arenas and such. If
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
So there are definite use cases. PCIe 3, it sort of sucked. 4, the
Better.
architecture got better.
5 will be
5 is
awesome.
where
Yeah,
it's coming into its
I didn't
own.
think about that. Yeah, with the launch of that will really make that very flexible.
Yeah.
Well, let
interesting.
me ask you this. I mean, there have been a couple attempts at that over the
Yes.
years, and you go back to like some of the first launches where
Exigo, where
Yep, big old
bought it.
InfiniBand
Yeah.
switch sitting in the middle. Yeah. So and like I mean, the idea was good, but it just wasn't there yet. It sounds like we're kind of turning that corner.
We're definitely getting more, but it's as companies put more into development and the overall software architecture around it. Like I mentioned, Exigo, which was almost 20 years ago with InfiniBand as the backbone. Great idea. People took those concepts, put them into CNAs, converged network adapters, where you could have networking and storage in one. Taking it a step further, we have like all SAN storage, or not all, but most, is going on 100 gig switches instead of SAS. So we're starting to merge together the technologies of networking, storage, all that. What used to be that hyper-converged vision more into software-defined everything.
Okay. Yeah, it's always an interesting space because I think some people just think AIML. They don't necessarily would know what that means.
Yep.
Because I think I don't know what people envision. It's almost like an interesting question. I almost feel like, once again, email us at the essays and IPAs, at cdillc.com. I would love to hear people's opinions of what they think AIML is, or what their families, whatever, right? Because I think it's one of those things where people picture like
Terminator,
iRobot, or like Terminator, or one of those things, as opposed to like inference and training type stuff, where it's like the classic thing, like, well, for those people that watch Silicon Valley, like hot dog, no hot dog kind of thing, like that, or like dog or cat is like the one that everybody kind of uses, like in basics, right? Is that type of ideology. If I show a computer tons of pictures and I identify enough cat and not cat, well, we've talked about the verifications on websites. You're literally training an AIML system that this is a fire hydrant, this is a fire hydrant, this is a light, this is a sidewalk, whatever it is, and you're doing training for them, for free basically, but you're also just verifying you're a human.
Yeah, and in the last 2 weeks, we've seen one of the biggest releases in years with ChatGPT. Basically, OpenAI and Elon Musk's
it kind of
initiative is they trained it on billions of entries, and you can have full conversations. But not only that, give it a piece of code and tell it to debug it, and it will give you a full summary. Or like the applications are limitless for that. Apart from that, stable diffusion and just the automated art. We've seen that for years, but it's
everybody
public,
went
it's
crazy with that. Oh my god, every influencer in the world had like that. One of the ones I love. Have you ever seen the different ones where they have they feed like tons of different commercials and stuff, and it has it like right like an Olive Garden commercial and like those different ones. Those are hilarious.
Just like 2 or 3 days ago, I saw on Twitter an author said, I wrote an entire children's book with ChatGPT with hints, and then I used Stable Diffusion to completely illustrate it.
Yeah.
So what would have taken months was a couple hours to create that book.
I mean, the Stable Diffusion stuff's crazy though, because I playing around with it. I actually loaded like bunch of family pictures into it, and I'm able to like the model that I've got trained. I can literally go in and show my wife in Paris laughing at out in front of a cafe.
Honey, we don't even have to go on family vacation. Look, you're already there.
And I mean,
we just saved $12,000.
It's amazing. I mean, and just the fact that it's able to put that together. I mean, and then ChatGPT with like the level of detail that thing's able to answer questions in, and usually correct. It's just
borderline terrifying.
Yeah. We're definitely seeing it enter the mainstream. Whether you have a Roomba, you use email, like you drive a car. My truck, it's not full self-driving, but it does 80 to 90%.
Yeah, lane assist, adjusting cruise control, like all those different things, right? Yeah, I mean, not like, just because you brought that up, obviously the utopia of that is, let's say Tesla with sensors and things like that, is to have essentially like a broadcasted network bubble around my car, and my car talks to your car and says, well, these are the distance that I'm approved to be at. So you're almost like in Minority Report, where all the cars are traveling in a line together. You're doing that same thing. There's no accidents.
Well,
but if it malfunctions, just like it, Minority Report and other things.
I know too many software developers to.
I know.
When you think about it, you've seen a lot of cases where fireworks have been replaced with drones, or like giant advertising over cities.
Yeah,
that's the same exact distancing technology that they showed in Minority
Report.
You're
right.
Because you have to control 3 or 4 inch drones within an inch of each other to get those advanced displays.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff for sure, and it definitely has practical and non-practical applications. Another thing I wanted to bring up with you guys before we wrap up is, because you mentioned kind of EUC, and obviously security was also a huge thing.
Sure.
As part of the pandemic. I think I always made the joke that hackers had like full-time jobs, and then they were home, so they had all free time to just do whatever they wanted. So more incidents, right? But for our job, I keep on talking about how we are an oxymoron, but a important part of our job is conveying technology to people of all different levels of understanding, right? You might have a C-level person that used to be in the weeds of things, but isn't anymore. That needs kind of the broad picture. Excuse me. Lots of beer. Executive level type things, right? And then you also have someone that is that hands-on, needs the bits and bytes of things, right? So in the pandemic, do you think there's any soft skills that people have lost? Like if I gave you a whiteboard right now, a physical whiteboard, not an iPad, not whatever, but a physical whiteboard, do you think you'd have the same, I don't want to say elegance, but would you have the same acumen to...
For me personally, yes, simply because doing 6 to 8 meetings and presentations a day, every day for years and years and years.
Okay.
And actually doing whiteboard training sessions, which I have to say for the vendors watching, one of the best things I've ever done at conferences was they brought in a dedicated whiteboard instructor.
Yeah, what colors to use, things like that. I think so let's pause for a second. I think once again for people looking to get into architecture, though you're not on site as much, I think that's a great point to make, is the ability to write on a whiteboard, or even just to collect your thoughts intelligently on how you organize, whether it's up, down, left, right, whatever those things may be.
Well, it doesn't even need to be in person. I mean, you can do that in a web meeting. I mean, that's a valuable skill, that translates.
But
it's definitely a skill that you have to keep up on, but that's the same as all of your soft skills. You just don't know how to do that. And speaking from experience, like I'm up here talking, but that's with me going through years of speech therapy growing up, or just being antisocial, or the one-man army sysadmin, and just I absolutely love training people, doing workshops and all that. And teenage me would have never thought I'd be doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm the same way. You know, I used to whisper my order to my mom to order like to the waitress,
Yes.
and now here we are. You know, type of thing.
Well, that's a dirty secret. It's like most people who do what we do are introverts at heart.
Yeah.
Well,
and trying to
that's
break
exactly
out.
it.
It's
exactly
yeah.
you know. Well, so before I kind of wrap up on that, are there any other soft skills that you think might have been lost? Is it eye contact? Is it body language? Like what?
I mean, I think just the familiarity of walking into a room and introducing yourself to everybody, and just that flow. But,
Human
I mean,
interaction.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah,
But,
that's
but
fine.
I mean, there's a trade-off to it though, where the other soft skills have been gained. And you know, the example I always give is my daughter was basically did her entire first grade year virtual. So she went through kindergarten, made
Sure.
that you know, when things got weird, and then first year was totally virtual. Her entire first grade class is able to do web meetings and jump into breakout rooms, and
That is pretty
virtual-
crazy.
right.
I didn't think about that. I have trouble with that.
Yeah, but I mean, at 7, these kids are doing this. I mean,
Yeah.
so it and you know that skill set kind of moved into the professional world as well. So I mean,
There's a different maturity that just developed.
Things were lost, things were gained.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that I guess because though I originally went to college for computer science, but I ended up with I won't bore anybody, business psychology degree. I had a whole class on nonverbal cues, which is body language, right? So that to me is one of those things that is definitely lost because everybody's multitasking all the time now, especially because you're home, right? And so that body language of seeing, whether it's mirroring or all those things that people do on dates also, right? It's like, is seeing, well, is Jarett actually paying attention to what I'm doing? Jason's not leaning in, so is he leaning out? Is he doing other like, not that I expect essays to learn that level, but some of that is just community and interaction. Like Rob in previous episode talked about storytelling, and that's really our job, is we're storytellers, right? And that's how you convey information. It's how people react to your story, how you hone it. You're like, okay, I can see that he's glazing over, I'm going a little too technical. Or this person, I'm not going technical enough, they're kind of getting bored. Okay, well, I need to get into the bits and bytes once again of whatever it is I'm designing, right? That's one of those things that I hope it's on idle and it's not lost. So when now that things are opening back up, companies are having people come to the office 2-3 times a week and all that stuff, that we have those skills when we need them. That like to your point in terms of whiteboarding, we've honed them enough that they're not lost, they're just hibernating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and honestly, like that body language reading, like that's one of the things that's challenging in our job, because like I feel like there was like this progression through everybody going virtual, where we started out where like everybody was on video. And then, it was like the early days when like we were all in video with like the virtual background.
Now it's you go, I go.
Right,
you go, I go.
right, yeah.
It's like,
and then
he's going to turn it on? Well, the customer didn't turn it on. Should I turn it on?
Yeah. So I'm finding like 80% of the meetings I'm having now, like unless you kind of make it uncomfortable to not have the video on, like you're not going to see anybody.
You're pressured for the camera.
It's getting harder again.
Along with that, everyone is more forgiving about little things now than they used to be.
That is fantastic.
So,
I mean,
I do
kids,
absolutely
cats,
love that. Yeah.
whatever it is. Yeah.
A little bit of background noise, no one's going to think down about it, because life happens, and you have to realize that.
Well, I think I don't remember if it was CNN or whatever it was that famous now interview where the kid ran in, and it's like the housekeeper, like for the nanny or whatever, like
Army
comes
trolls
and like grabs the kid, like, but that's. But that makes people human, if somebody has a cat, there's probably their cat's butt is probably on the camera at one point in time or another, right? But I think that's a great place to end a podcast on cat butts.
Cat butts.
Because anybody that has a cat obviously understands. But yeah, I want to say, first of all, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you both for joining in. I really appreciate it. And the last thing I'll say is, we said to write in. I think another thing that I would love to hear from the audience is either video call faux pas or like mishaps. Like someone has their camera on and they're not wearing a shirt. Someone's, like whatever it may be.
Bonus points for screenshots.
Exactly. If you could prepare, video pictures that didn't happen kind of thing, right? So, but definitely thank you once again for watching, and we really appreciate everybody. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Essays and IPAs is a production of CDI Studios and is produced by Alyssa Hall and Spencer Grogan. To learn more about CDI, you can visit cdillc.com.